everyone. Welcome. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We are so excited to have you. I'm Kara. I am a technical writer here at Google working on Google Workspace developer products. And I also work part-time with the Google Workspace developer relations team, where I get to come and talk to our amazing developer community like all of you. Join with me today is Charles Maxson. He is a developer advocate on the Google Workspace developer relations team. And I must say, he is one of the funniest, kindest, most talented, what was the other thing I was going to say?
Charming.
Most charming man I have ever known. Is that good?
Right.
Okay. And what we'd like to do today is make sure that you leave this session excited and ready to build custom AI-powered solutions for Google Workspace using Gemini and Appscript. Now, if you have built with Google Appscript before, you understand how magical it can be for Google Workspace. It was built with the intent to make it easy for you to access Google Workspace's functionality, the content of Google Workspace, and your users' context to build these hyper-customized solutions. And nothing about that changes as we add AI into the mix. We're simply amplifying the experience for your users and the impact you can make with that custom solution. So what does Appscript look like in this AI era? Well, by accessing these APIs like Gemini API or Vertex API, we can totally transform our existing solutions, and we can build completely new ones that before we could only dream of. Think about how much more valuable that programmatic access to your workspace content now is, because think about the things that you can do with AI with your emails in Gmail, or your chat history from Google Chat, or all those files in Google Drive. By synthesizing that data with AI, you can bring user centricity to the next level. And Appscript makes it easy to bundle all of that content together, put it in your prompt, send it over to Gemini, and handle that response so that you can deliver curated, more predictable AI experiences for your users. And there are so many opportunities to use AI in Workspace. Charles, why don't you tell us about some of the use cases that we've heard of since AI came around?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thank you for that wonderful introduction. We almost nailed it, almost got it perfect. And also, I want to thank all you joining us today, or folks watching the video. If you're doing workspace development, I think this is one of the most exciting times we've seen, because the solutions you can build, as Kara mentioned, are things that we only dreamed of even a few short months ago. The possibilities are virtually endless, only limited by your imagination and your willingness to roll up your sleeves. We've all seen how great use cases like summarization and helping bring insights into users in new ways before by using AI have really been game changers. And the ability to do things like analysis and rich content tagging and content creation, and all these great use cases are possible. I just want to give you an example of one I heard this week I think really resonates to folks at a conference. I was talking to Vishal from our Seattle GDG group, and he said to me, when I come to an event like this, what I like to do is take recordings, take images, find any content I can, and then when I go back, I synthesize that and I create a trip report and I share it with folks on my team. And I said, what do you think about taking all that content, putting it inside a Google Drive, using the Drive API to pull it out, send that content off to Vertex AI, synthesize that content, then using the Docs API, automatically write that entire trip report, so at a push of a button, you've created a solution. That is all possible today. There's great use cases that you can only dream of. Actually, I want that. In fact, I think we need to build that. Anyway, so there's a whole host of ways you can actually build solutions inside of Google Workspace, whether you're inside the surface of things like custom functions, or using custom smart chips, aka link previews, or standalone apps that run on triggers, or things like our add-on models to build great solutions. There's so many things. We're going to share some with you in a second through some of our demos, but there's a nice little short link on the bottom here to check out a great page that Kara built to show you all the different ways you can interact with the user in the solutions that you build. Kara, how do you get started though?
You know, getting started is actually easier than you might think. We have a little checklist here, and you'll notice that the first one is something that you're already doing today when you work on Google Workspace. You just need a great solution design, which means you want to think about, like Charles said, there's so many ways that you can surface your solution. Will it be a custom function? Will it be an add-on? Is it going to be a chat app? What is the most sense for your users? How will that data flow through? You want to make sure that you're thinking about the use case and the user and then surfacing your solution accordingly. The next thing, and this is the most important thing, is you want to build an effective prompt. And I'm not going to go deep into prompt engineering here, but we'll show you a couple of prompts that have worked for us. And this is something that you're probably already doing if you've used Gemini on its own or Gemini for Workspace. You're building these prompts, and with a custom solution, what you're effectively doing is building that prompt and sending it on behalf of the user. So think about how that changes with how dynamic you might want to make it, how many guardrails you want to put in place for your user. Crafting that effective prompt is going to be the most important part of your AI solution. The next thing, and this might be, it might seem easy or even obvious, but it's how it's the call that you're making to the API. So whether it's Vertex or Gemini API, you're going to set up that API call, and once you have it set up, it's kind of a set it and forget it situation because you're just sending your prompt through to the Gemini model. The next thing, probably less obvious, but you're going to want to plan for how you manage the response. So maybe you need to format the response a certain way, or perhaps you're planning to chain multiple calls to Gemini together to complete a more complex task in Google Workspace. So you want to have a plan for what Gemini hands back to you in your solution. And then lastly, everything you already know about building on Workspace still applies. How are you going to handle errors? How are you going to make things more efficient in your solution? These are all things that you're continually thinking about as you build on Google Workspace. So before you get started, you do want to ask yourself the following questions. And I know with AI being all the rage, this first question can be a bit of a bold statement, but does this problem actually need an AI solution? Adding AI to your Workspace solution can be amazing. And it can also add some cost, some time, some unpredictability. So you just want to be sure that if you're going to add AI to your solution, it will absolutely be more effective in doing so. Charles, what's the next thing we should think about?
The next thing you want to do is make sure that you're not competing with some great out-of-the-box functionality. And again, this isn't new. If you've built solutions in the past, you know that out-of-the-box Workspace offers so much value that there's no point of reinventing the wheel if there's a great future coming. We've already seen, since we've even started building some Appscript demos, that Gemini is bringing on so many great new use cases that we're already seeing where some of our famously good solutions are now being included in the product.
So good.
So they are still good, but you definitely want to make sure that you're not reinventing the wheel and you're not competing with this. That said, the same reason applies. We build custom solutions because we work in custom ways. And so if you have the ability to chain together a bunch of events or bring content in unique ways that's unique to your business or your customer's business, absolutely build it, but just be careful and don't be surprised if some of these things pop up inside of Gemini for Workspace.
Absolutely. And finally, the last thing is something that you should be asking yourself, whether you are building with AI or not. When you want to build with Appscript, make sure you can accomplish your goals using Appscript. This is something that it's hard for me to concede because I'm so passionate about Appscript. I want it to do everything, but we all know that sometimes you need to scale, you need a little more power. So think about the goals that you're trying to achieve, who you're building for, and confirm that Appscript is the right path for you. Okay. Why don't we switch over to the demos, and we want to show you guys some of the use cases that we've conjured up along with a few of our team members as well. Okay, we're going to start with the classic custom function. Now, this is a great example of bringing your user into the AI process in a context that they're very familiar with, which is a Google Sheets function. Okay, so in this example, we are looking at some demo data about product reviews. And wouldn't it be awesome if we could just pull out some insights of what people are saying about our product? Well, with AI, we've built a custom function called Gemini. So on this sheet here, I'm going to plug it in and put in my Gemini function. This function takes 2 arguments. We're going to select the range that we'd like to send prompts about. So I'm going to go back to the Data tab, and I'm just going to select the entire range of customer data. Oop, hold on, I'm going to try that again. Oh, I should just use the mouse. Okay, I'm going to select this entire range. And of course, I want to make this an absolute reference because I want to copy this function down in the next sheet. And then I'm going to add my prompt, which I already have listed here. So I'm going to grab cell A2 for my prompt. And let's see what Gemini has to say. Okay, so this worked really well. It worked very fast. Now, let's just go ahead and drag this function down. And now we can send all of these prompts about our... Oh, now I'm just moving it. Oops. Okay. Well, hold on. Oh boy. Okay, so now we're copying the function to all of the cells here, and it's going to give us all the information that we've asked from these prompts.
So what just happened is you actually referenced the cell wrong, which is perfect because it shows you this is, after all, just a custom function. And one of the great things I love about this example, not only is it a great way to quickly let users play with it, but I actually use this tool to prototype my prompts right here, so I don't actually have to go into any other tool, and I just press a custom function and drag them down and see how they respond, which is super neat. And so now you'll see how easy it works.
I am just correcting my work here.
So the great thing, all live demos.
Yeah, right? Now you know it's real and working. Okay.
And there you go.
Here we go. Okay, so let's talk about a few things that we learned as we entered Gemini into the Google Sheets function. So what we've realized is that Gemini is very good about things like sentiment or semantic understanding. For example, we can ask it about negative feedback, and it understands that really well. We can even ask it, okay, has anyone returned our product? And if you look at the data, there's really no one here that said, I actually returned this product, but they did say, oh, I had to send this back. And so Gemini was able to infer that, okay, that means a return. So it's actually doing some pretty good analysis on that front. Now, another thing that we learned is we don't really want to use these Gemini models that aren't specifically trained for mathematics to do our math for us. So instead of saying, okay, what is the average rating and risking any unpredictability, we're asking it to craft the built-in mathematical functions of Sheets that we may or may not know exist. So we can ask it for things to build those functions that we might not be familiar with, but we can say what we want it to do, and that has been super helpful. Okay, the last thing I want to show you is using a custom function like this, you can almost create something like a dashboard or even a mini app within your spreadsheet by creating these pre-prompts in a dropdown like this, where maybe you've tested these prompts already, you know they work, you want to deliver them to your users, so they can just select a question from the dropdown and then get that answer from the custom function right from Gemini.
So Kara, when you showed me this application, I thought it was super brilliant. Then I saw how little code it was, and I realized you were super brilliant for making these things look so easy. How did you build it?
Absolutely. So let's look at the code. Okay. Here it is. Now,
I said it was a little bit of code.
So you'll see here that our actual custom function is very small. We're calling it Gemini. Like I said, we take 2 parameters here, and the prompt is just asking for this range of cells, which the user selects, and then our prompt, which the user can build in. And you can also add, a preamble here. If there's something that you don't want to make your user repeat over and over again, you can add that right on the back end. And then it returns a AI summary function that it's calling. So let's jump into that function here. And this is where you're going to see us calling the Gemini API. So first, we're going to put together our content. We're dropping our prompt into the text. And then we've got some configuration settings here that are actually optional. So you can play with things like the temperature, the max output tokens, and these are things that when you're working in a spreadsheet, you might want to limit those output tokens. You don't want to overload a cell. So it might be good to control that on the back end as well. And you can see here that Charles and I are playing fast and loose with the safety settings, but these are optional as well. You can block more. We decided to block none and just see how it goes. But I believe the default setting is medium. If you're something like an EDU organization, you might want to raise that. Or if you're cowboys like Charles and I, you might just want to block nothing. And the next thing is we're building our request. So this is going to be a post request, and we're stringifying the JSON. And it's pretty straightforward in terms of using URL fetch to call a RESTful API. We've got our API key that we're storing in our properties, and then we're putting together the URL fetch call to the Gemini API. We're using the Gemini V1 beta model, and including our options. Now, when we get the payload back, what we're doing is extracting the text from the Gemini response and just returning that right to the custom function. It gets inserted into the cell. So yeah, once you get this set up, it's very simple. And I want to point out that we are using the Gemini API here because it doesn't require user authorization. So this is something that is the most straightforward way to build your custom function by using Gemini API, because you can use an API key to access it. There are ways, if you decide that for your organization you must use the Vertex AI API, that does require a user auth, and you can achieve some of these goals through using a service account with a service key, or giving everybody in your organization who's using this custom function access to that service account, which can add some complexity. So you want to make sure that you understand whether the Gemini API is enough for your needs, or how to handle it if you want to use the Vertex AI API. Anything to add before we move on?
Good stuff.
Great. Okay, so the next demo I want to show you is actually going to be a Sheets editor add-on. And this is a demo that was actually created by Nathan Gammy. He's a tech lead on the Google Workspace content team, so shout out to him and a big thank you for conjuring up this use case. So, like Charles said, there's a lot of ways that you can build for Workspace, and it's great because one of the biggest use cases is this bulk automation. People want to automate processes across Workspace, and we give them so many ways to do it. This demo specifically uses the Sheets editor add-on for a few reasons. The first being, we can pull up the custom menu and open up a customized sidebar here. With editor add-ons, we're using the HTML Appscript service to create a custom UI. That gives us a little more flexibility in what we present to our users. For example, we've got some in-app documentation here of how to use the auto-summarize AI. We've got some custom prompts. And what this is doing is it's taking a list of files, whether it's documents or presentations, and it's going to automatically summarize what's in those files. Now, that's a built-in prompt on the back end, but we want to bring the user into the loop a little bit, so we've added these custom prompts so that when you're using this app, you'll get your summary, you'll get a few more things that we've asked Gemini to do on the back end, but you can also add some custom stuff in there as well. So let me go ahead and paste in something from the clipboard. What we want to know is, what are the key takeaways for developers for this content? And I'm going to select a document down here, and I'm only going to select one. We could select the whole list, but in the essence of time here, I'm just going to select one. But again, that is another reason that we chose an editor add-on, because you get more runtime with editor add-ons than you do with Google Workspace add-ons. And one last thing to show you before I click Get Summaries is we've also added this great prompt settings configuration where your users can see a slider to play with the temperature, to play with the output token limit, which again, with working in a spreadsheet, it's great to limit that. It's more efficient with your code, and you're not going to blast your spreadsheet with a bunch of text.
And I think that's a great addition because it allows you to include the user in this AI journey. Sometimes you want to mask the complexity from them and build the prompt for them. But here we're kind of introducing them and hoping they can do more, because spreadsheet developers normally like to have a little more control. I think that's a great addition. Why don't we run this thing and see it work?
All right, let's do it. Okay, so what this is doing is it's sending information that we've asked to Gemini. It's grabbing those files. It's going to generate a summary. You can also see that we've added an ask for either a slide count if we send it a presentation or a word count if it's a document. And here we are. It's already back. So we've got the title of the document. It's about 310 words. It's exactly 310 words. We've got our summary, and we've also got the response of our custom prompt. So this is an awesome way to build that flexibility of a structured prompt for your user with some user-in-the-loop inclusion to give them customization options. Okay, so Charles, I believe next we're going to show a Google Workspace add-on. Why don't you talk more about that?
Let's do it. So one of the great things is there's, again, a lot of different ways and a lot of different choices you could build things. There's also different use cases. In this use case, what we're going to do is literally use content from Workspace in a multimodal search so we can actually look at imagery as well as text. So say, for example, we're building a slide deck because we are giving a presentation after
Indeed.
all. And say I wanted to know, is this slide effectively built? Is it good? So we actually have a tool called Rate My Slide, which is a Google Workspace add-on. In this case, what it's going to do, and it's going to run it real quick here, it's going to take the slide image as a PNG, as an image object, and then the slide notes as text. Take both of those pieces, send them up to Gemini. In this case, we're using Vertex, and we put some rules around it and said, hey, can you tell us about this slide? Can you rate it on things like simplicity, on color, on type, on structure? And you can see, by the way, we're a pretty good slide builder. We got a B+, I guess, maybe a name.
Unbelievable.
But then the great thing is it does it. So the nice thing is you can go through and try a bunch of different ones here and actually help you build better slides. Now, in this case, you notice we're only doing one slide at a time. This was actually built before we had a million tokens. So we made it work a little simpler, but also made the experience a lot nicer for the users because you can focus per slide. Of course, you could do the whole deck at a time, which would be great to do and extend this model. Real quick, the code for all of these that you've seen so far are available on these two URLs up on GitHub. So check those out, take those down, a great place to see that. I'm just going to share real quick, but not go into grave detail on the prompt here. That is the entire prompt there. It simply says your task is to provide some feedback, tells you what we want to do, tells you those categories, and at the end tells the format. We'll talk about prompts more in a second, but I wanted to show you that real quick. That was the hardest prompt we built or was built in any of these.
I mean, this is amazing. Think about what you might do as a branding or marketing department. You know, you can help your entire organization build effective slides without having to do a personalized review each time.
So my next use case is inside of Drive. And again, another Workspace add-on, and I wrote this one out of necessity. Raise your hand, and if you're sitting at home by yourself watching this video, raise your hand. Do you create documents for notes called untitled document and then leave a bunch of files in your Drive? I do. Everybody here does too. Wow, I knew
of the
that.
room.
Okay,
Yep.
So wouldn't you like to get rid of them fast or give better names? So AI will allow us to do this. In this case, I can simply click on a file. I didn't open that file. And you'll notice when I get that context sent to my add-on, what it does is it gives me a summary so I know what that file's about in a few words. And then I also can pick a name. I'll pick a name, Unlocking Productivity, and say, great, there you go. And it renamed it for me. No more unnamed file. I can also go through and find some other ones and say, you know what? This file doesn't evaluate to anything. Didn't even need AI for that. Just move that to trash. And I have a great utility to really save myself some time and get rid of all those entitled documents. I'm going to move on to the next one kind of quickly here to make up a little time. This one is actually super neat because it allows you to go in and manage your inbox. So say, for example, I want to do things like classify my attachments or auto label or do sentiment analysis, which is what I'll do here. One of the great things is I'm actually going out and running AI against some of the content in my inbox. So what it's going to do, it's going to run, come back here. I'm just going to refresh this real fast. And you'll notice what it did is it went through the last week of my email and said, oh, look at this one first. Look at me. There's a problem here. You have a customer that's actually complaining about your support. You can see here, support for our contact. I wanted you to know I'm a little frustrated, so it obviously picked that up. I have a problem. I need to figure out what's going on here. So what we did is we built that add-on to also not just work with content inside the inbox, but also allow me to see the information of who is that from, and then go out and connect to Jira and pull in information specific to this email, to this customer, take that content, give me a little smiley face or a frowny face. If it's bad, I can quickly see where the problems are. I get a summary of the frustration, and then I can see, for example, that Charles Maxson received an escalation, and apparently I'm the problem. Which
as per usual.
we have heard that story before. The neat thing now is I can take that content, and with a simple click again, after I synthesize Jira content, I'm now synthesizing that into an email. I can reply, and I can get that negative tone off my books.
Amazing.
So awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So one more quick one, and I love this one. This one is really around chat. So one of the great things is chat has released a full API to allow you to access many areas inside of chat. And so one of the things we have a great solution that our team uses for our developer stand-up. And I actually have a little app to help simulate this. So these are actually sent by triggers from Appscript. So I'm going to simulate the weekly trigger that we get. I'll run that, and I'll come back. You'll see it comes here in a second. And so now it's asking everybody to simply put their activities they did this week inside this chat. So once again, I'm just going to simulate that and send some messages. And you'll see these messages come in here. And while they come in, let me open it up and show you what's happening. So there's my snippets, there's Kara's, there's Pierre's.
Look at us go.
Which is great, but now I have all these snippets I have to read through and synthesize, and I don't want to read 9 things. I'd like to read like 1 or 2 or 3. Well, what we did is using the chat API, I'm just going to, again, simulate that trigger running. And what it's going to do, it's going to go out and it's going to take that entire list of sub-messages, synthesize those, summarize them short, and put it back in the header, so I can simply turn this off. And when I turn this off, I can now just read this and only see the summary, which is super neat. One of the things I love about this is after folks use this, and again, it's just a team site that we use all the time, Space, so a lot of folks put in information in there, and they chat. As you know, chat can get kind of chatty. And so what I'd like to do, again, is make it real easy for when the next week comes and we need a new stand-up. Not only do we collect the new ones in a new thread, we can actually navigate back through the old threads and go through every thread for every week to see everything. So it's super awesome way to keep that. Okay, that said, we've got one more, and I'm going the wrong way. This one's yours. Why don't you show us?
One more, yes, okay. Now, here we have one of our latest ways to extend the Google Workspace UI, and that is by making a link preview. If you're unfamiliar, when you drop a link into something like Google Docs, Sheets, or Slides, you can turn that link into a chip, hover over it, and then you'll get a link preview that you can build for any URL that you like. Now here, I've built a link preview for the Google Workspace developer documentation, and what I've done is I have asked Gemini to create a summary of the page so that our users, when they have a link in this page, can get the gist of information that they need without leaving the context of the doc that they're in. But because we're using Gemini, I wanted to make sure there's some user interaction available there just in case something unpredictable happens and the summary isn't as good as we'd like. So we added these rate this summary buttons where you can say, okay, yeah, this looks good, or, ooh, this isn't great. When I click not great, it's going to ask Gemini to re-summarize the page and hopefully, uh-oh, looks like Gemini got stage fright. Okay, so let's try again.
The neat thing is you put error handling in. That was a plus.
I sure did, yeah. Yeah, so this is another, title's out of date. Okay. Okay, so this is another best practice of wanting to make sure that you are error handling. With Gemini, things can go wrong. You might run into, limits and quotas that were not there before, but let's try another one just to see if that might be the problem. Okay, so we've got this. We're gonna downvote the card service page and see what happens. Okay, so here, this works successfully because live demos are the best. And now we have a new page summary from Gemini. And I want to point out that something important we're doing for this type of use case is actually storing these summaries in Firestore so that we're not calling Gemini every time there's a URL in the document. Because think about how many people might be accessing this document and want to see this link preview, or how many times this link is used across several documents. So you don't need to call that API every single time. You can call Firestore instead, check to see if that summary is available, and call it back immediately. Okay, so I think we have a bit of time to look at the code here and see how we did this. This is really exciting because we, Control Shift, are going to show you now a variation of using Vertex API. Okay, let me jump into the main file here. Now, this is the main function that's going to build the link preview for us. And the first thing that we do, once we realize that we have a matched URL, is we're going to grab the HTML of the page using URL fetch, because the first thing we do is grab the page title for our link preview. Next, we want to check about whether or not we're actually updating an existing summary or if we're creating a totally new one. If we are updating something that somebody downvoted, we want to find that URL in Firestore and make sure that we delete the actual entry. So we're going to query the URL and then delete it from Firestore. Okay, so once we've done that, we're moving on. So now we are going to query Firestore to see if that summary exists. If it doesn't, we need to create it. So the next thing we're going to do is go back to the HTML that we grabbed using URL fetch, and we're going to chunk out the content of the page that will help us build a summary. Now, with our developer documentation pages, we often have a bunch of extra HTML that we don't really need to send to Gemini. So we're just going to chunk out the part of the page that Gemini can use to generate that summary. We add that to our prompt here. And I want to talk a little bit about this prompt because when I first created this, I just started with a few words. I said, hey, give me a summary of this page. Well, after some iteration, we realized that just like in prompt engineering best practices, you want to add things like a persona, some context, some format requests, some guardrails for the prompt to get the result that you want. So now it turned into a bit of a paragraph along with the chunk of HTML that we're sending through. Okay, so the next thing that we do is we get that summary and we want to save it to Firestore. We send it there, and then we send it back to the link preview, which will surface in the document. Okay, now, before I go into Vertex, I do want to point out that I am using a public library for Firestore, which made it a whole lot easier to store these things in Firestore. So instead of making several calls to URL fetch, you can use a public library that you can access on GitHub that will make it a lot easier to keep calling Firestore and looking for things, deleting things, and storing things. Okay, let's jump into the Vertex function. Okay, so spoiler alert, you'll notice it's not that different from calling the Gemini API. There are a few things that we can talk about, but the structure is very similar. We've got our contents here, we're sending through that prompt, and here we are setting some configuration settings. We're not using the defaults, but we are using the defaults for the safety settings, so our options are actually a lot shorter. Now, you'll also notice that because Vertex API requires user auth, we do get that OAuth token. We stringify our JSON request just like before. And then once again, we're using URL fetch app to make the call to the API. Now with Vertex, we're choosing a location, we're choosing a project ID. So these are little differences in the call, but the main structure is pretty much the same.
And I love what you said before. It's basically set and forget. Once you write one of these, you can use it over and just
it becomes muscle memory at that point. Okay, so and just like before, we have to get the payload, grab that text out of it, and then we're returning that text back to the link preview to surface in our document. Okay. All right, great. Anything to add?
If we go back to the slides, we can...
Actually, before we go back to the slides...
Sorry, maybe not.
Oh, sorry. Can we switch back real quick? We do want to point out real quick that we are in the midst of adding all of these code samples to our Appscript samples folder on the Google Workspace GitHub. So if you haven't checked it out, this is where you want to go to get the code.
Awesome. Now we'll go back to the
Now we can go back to the slides. Okay, so hopefully you guys have seen some pretty cool demos. You're excited, you're ready. If we've achieved that, we've achieved our goal. But we also want to share some better practices and considerations, and we're calling them better practices because best practices for Appscript and AI are still forming. I mean, this is a rapidly changing space, and so we're all learning together, and we'll share some of the things that we've learned, but the best thing that you can do is lean on this incredible developer community that we have and share some of your learnings with us. And Charles, I think you should kick it off with one of the most important learnings is about prompt design.
Absolutely. And so first of all, you probably recognize this already when you're working with AI. It's really important to understand how to create a great prompt. And there's no exceptions here, right? It's the same idea. All the same similar rules apply, right? You want to have natural language. You want to be clear and specific. You saw that our prompts were somewhere between 20 to 50 words. One a little longer, one shorter. Some were simple pass-throughs straight from a spreadsheet. But the bottom line is you want to make sure you follow that structure, right? It's setting, or in some cases we refer to that as persona, specifically workspace. We also make sure you get the context. In this case, the context is your content coming from workspace. Docs, sheets, slides, chats, Gmails, etc. We also want to break it down. As you saw, we refine those and iterate over and over again to make sure we get the right experience. As Kara mentioned, they don't just fall out of the box, so to speak, but once you play with it and get them going there, then you kind of set it and forget it and they work. If you haven't checked it out or haven't gotten one of these copies already physically, you can go up there to that Go link and get the Google Workspace Prompting Guide 101, which will help you understand specifically in terms of workspace what you can do. So Gemini Workspace prompts are very similar to the ones you'll use here in Appscript as well too. So a great way of doing it. Just real fast, I want to share with you the Name with Intelligence Drive add-on prompt, just so you can see how we break it down and show you the pieces. So real quickly, we took, again, that single variable that we're passing, but you'll notice we broke it up into those pieces that are important to make a very healthy prompt. So the first thing is the tasks. So in this case, remember I wanted a couple things back from the Drive API and from the document. My first task was, I want 3 potential names. And see there, I'm very clear, 3 names, so I can make 3 bullets. I don't want to give more than 3 choices. 3 is perfect. I also want a summary explicitly saying 2 to 3 sentences. I don't want the whole doc back. I don't want a short bunch of words. That's what I want. So I've set up a couple tasks, and again, we bundled those tasks together to make it work. Then one of the most important things is around format. As a developer, you want predictability coming back to you in your solution. So in this case, I chose to have it return to me as a JSON object that I could parse. And I was very, again, specifically saying, I want the first field called names and the second field called summary. This way I get back exactly what I want, I parse that, and I push it back into my solution. And then finally, the context was simply derived by taking that file from Drive, getting the entire body of its content, and passing that entire context off to, in this case, Vertex, to make that work. Okay, so real fast, in the few minutes we have left, how does working with AI change Appscript? And the answer is very little. There are some things that you can introduce along the way, and we demonstrated some of those today. A little more processing time that you have to think about. Can I do this in an add-on, for example? Or
error handling.
Or should I have caching? Or what happens when you have a new error type and you handled it? You handled that error very graciously and it worked. But those are some of the considerations you'll need to do. You also have to think about things like managing limits. We all know that tokens are huge now, 1 million, soon 2 million. But do you want to send that? Do you need to send that? Should you send that? Again, you want to think about those things. Costs, time, complexity, getting the right results back, all those things factor up. The other important thing is these aren't set and forget solutions. Sure, the API call may be, but as these large language models evolve, as there's more functionality being added, as there's more capabilities, or simply the models learn new things, you may get different results. So you'll probably have to revisit these solutions more often than you would in some of the applications you built in the past. But that said, it's just Appscript. What you already know is applicable. Appscript easily can leverage it, as you've seen, AI today. So again, things like making sure you handle processing times, making sure that you plan for errors, right? Making sure that you make your code so modular that you could go back and forth easily between AI Studio and Vertex AI. One of my favorite things is I get my prompt working, I make those calls out to AI, then I stop doing that and I just work with a JSON payload so I can actually debug faster and make it easier. Modularity helps me with that. As Kara mentioned, you have to do things like figuring out how do I handle my API keys. You don't want to share your keys with all users, so maybe you want to put them in properties, or maybe you want to use the secret management API to do something like that. So you want to think about that. One of the things it does mention, and we brought this up, inside of things like custom functions, for example, most users are used to working with them, and most Appscript users don't think about going into GCP at all, right? They don't have to build full-fledged default project. With AI Studio, you can do that. However, if you want to use Vertex, you're going to need a standard project and give access to folks to have them working inside of Google Cloud. And so again, think about what your use cases is, who's using it, how you're deploying it, but for the most part, everything really kind of stays the same with a few considerations. What about this? We wrote this prompt over and over again, but there's an easier way, isn't there?
Yeah, so today we kind of showed you guys the hard way to call the Gemini API, which is great, but a few of our Google Workspace developer experts, led by Martin Hoxie, have created a public GitHub library that you can use to make your calls to these Gemini models far more easily than what we've shown you today. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention that you do want to weigh the costs and benefits of using a library in Appscript, because it can add some runtime to your script. So think about how you want to set it up, think about your user needs, think about your solution, and how much you can use a library versus if you need to actually use those URL fetch calls. So this is very exciting. Go try it out. And yeah, go put the practices in best practices. It's something that we're all doing. This is a huge shift that we're all involved in. This is a really exciting time. So go forth, practice, lean on each other, tell us how you're doing, tell us what you're doing, and we'll share our best practices as we learn them with you.
You'll be surprised what you can build with Appscript and AI. Dream big. But one of the things I've had the most fun with is you show some of these simple solutions like the untitled name my document, and people go crazy for it. So with little effort, you can become a hero pretty fast. That's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Yes. And to help you get started on this journey, we invite you to look at the documentation. Our developer documentation site is full of great information about Google Workspace development, as well as the Gemini API and Vertex API. We also have an amazing Google Workspace developers YouTube channel with lots of content about developing on the platform. And Charles and I are actually co-hosts of a community show called Totally Unscripted that we host along with Martin Hoxie and Alex Keeler, two of our Google developer experts. And we talk about these topics, every other week, and it's fun, it's casual. It's a great chance to learn more and dive deep and ask questions live to us about developing on Google Workspace.
Yeah, our Workspace developer community is super active. There's tons of libraries out there. My favorite line is, the best code is code that somebody wrote for you.
Absolutely.
There's tons of folks willing to help. There's tons of folks actually able to share their solutions, share their content. So we've got a great community. We're glad you guys are all a part of it. Super awesome. So with that,
thank you so much for being here.